welcome to Culture on I-24 News. I'm Oded Grober, and today we devote our show to the Israeli elections, which are taking place today, only 2 years after the last round. We'll discuss what part, if any, does culture play in politics. We'll see what happens when artists take a political stand, and we'll talk about political campaigns. But we begin with the budget. In Israel, the culture budget is significantly lower than in other countries in the OECD. Recently, there's been a public campaign to raise the culture budget. More in this report by Daniel Campos.
Throughout 2014, a campaign by artists and institutions to increase the cultural budget started gaining attention on social media. Israel currently spends only 0.18% of the state budget on culture, a disappointing sum compared to the average 1% to 3% that most OECD countries give to culture. On Facebook and other social media, artists from a diversity of fields replaced their profile picture with the logo of the struggle for cultural budget, 1% for the soul. Actors and celebrities also used Instagram to call for a rise of 1%. Actors were not alone in their struggle. Prominent stages and theaters such as the Cameri, Susan Delal, Beit Lessin, museums and dance companies also lent support. Famous actors including Norman Issa, Sasson Gabay, Moshe Ivki, and Esti Sackheim played the important role of bringing the fight to the parliament. Parliamentarian Amnon Mitzna sided with the artists and presented a bill in their favor. Part of the strategy used by the protesting artists was to compare the Israeli culture budget with that of European countries. Other forms of protest attacked former Israeli Finance Minister Yair Lapid with comics and memes. According to Shaham, the Actors Union, at least 70% of the actors in Israel hold down another job just to make ends meet, and some 64% of them earn below the average salary. As a result of the demands, Minister of Culture Limor Livnat announced that by 2015, the budget would grow by 120 million shekels. An accomplishment still far from the 1% goal, but perhaps this marks the beginning of a new phase in which artists will no longer wait for change to come and will instead stand up and demand what they deserve.
All right. Joining us now is I-24 News' economy correspondent Daniel Roth to take a closer look at this matter. Thanks for coming in, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
So where do we stand? How bad is bad?
Israel's budget is bad when it comes to culture. 0.17% is low. Most, as the report mentioned, most countries in the OECD are looking at between 1 and 2%. So 0.17% is small.
Pretty far.
The US is a little ahead with 0.28%, but across Europe, it's by and large, if it's close to 1%, it's just under that. It's so significantly lower.
Yeah. And do we feel the result of that?
Well, it's interesting because for such a small country that with such a small number of people speaking the Hebrew language, it's fairly impressive actually how much art there is out there, how much culture is being produced in this country, despite the lack of public funding for it.
But that only, to me, that says think of what could have been done if it was supported as it should.
Absolutely, and it's a question of where priorities are, and if not even 1% of the budget is going to culture, it's a real question. What is the public purse being focused on? Right. Given the passion for culture here, given how much people want it. And that, you know, it's a divergence of what the population wants and what the government is spending on.
How does that translate to what people are promising? How many people are talking about how much they're going to spend on culture to get elected?
Well, promises. Lots of politicians make lots of promises. On the cultural side of things, there's not a lot of talk. It's not exactly the linchpin in anyone's campaign.
Right.
It doesn't really get the vote out the way people would want it to if they wanted it to be a central issue. That said, there are people who talk about it. By and large, there's 3.5 categories. There's on the left parties like Meretz and like Hadash that talk about funding and keeping government control and censorship out of cultural funding.
Okay.
There are some parties who talk about funding up to 1%, like this movement is asking for, but treading a fine line of censoring things that go against Israeli policy or speak out against things that are happening. So, for example, the Zionist Union's leader, Yitzhak Herzog, said we should fund extra, we should fund up to 1%, we should fund more. And we shouldn't censor, but we should censor.
We shouldn't censor, but we should make sure everybody says what we want.
Exactly.
Okay.
Democracy is this fine balance, and of course you can't overstep the bounds of what democracy is, and all of these things.
What other approaches are there?
So on the right, there's almost no talk of culture. Parties like Jewish Home, Beit Yehudi, and Likud, the ruling party right now, they don't talk about culture at all. It's not in their purview. They don't have if they even have proposals about anything, they don't have proposals about culture.
And last but not least,
well, so then there are the religious parties, and these religious parties in some cases actually say up the ante for culture, up the ante for Mizrahi culture, up the ante for religious culture, up it, but don't say anything bad about the state specifically. Or
about religion.
Or about, of course. Well, in many of these cases, the two are the same for them in their eyes.
All right, so apparently these elections will not be decided on the arts.
Right.
Shocking, but well, maybe someday. Daniel, thanks.
Thank you.
Israel is, of course, a highly politicized country where everyone holds firm opinions about everything from geopolitical problems to economic issues. And yet, popular artists in Israel are not known for being politically outspoken. They usually prefer to play it safe and not be identified with any camp so as not to risk alienating any part of their potential audience. More in this report.
In recent years, taking a political stand, especially one that isn't acceptable in mainstream Israel, can come with a cost. The recent Operation Protective Edge provided some good examples. Actress and comedian Orna Banai said during an interview that she hurts for the people of Gaza who are suffering. Her remarks caused an uproar in the Israeli public, a deluge of negative and violent comments on the web, and even lost her an advertising campaign for cruise company Mano. A group of directors at the 2014 Jerusalem Film Festival, including Shira Geffen, Nadav Lapid, and Keren Yedaya, signed the directors' petition which called for a ceasefire and was equally bombarded with negative comments. Culture Minister Limor Livnat published a status on Facebook calling the petition disgraceful. Rapper Yoav Eliassi, known as The Shadow, went out against left-wing activists who decided to protest against the war, even calling for action against them and instigating violent protests. His actions were condemned by politicians and he was called by many an attention-seeking provocateur. But it's not only during wartime that artists can get into trouble. In February 2014, singer Ariel Zilber was supposed to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award from Akum, the Israeli Music Federation. However, the prize created an uproar because Zilber, once a part of the secular art scene, is today ultra-Orthodox and right-wing and speaks out against gays and in favor of settlements. Zilber ended up receiving the prize, albeit under a different name, for contribution to Israeli music. During the 80s and 90s, however, actors and comedians appeared prominently in campaign ads for political parties. In the 1980s, legendary comedian Sefi Rivlin participated in humorous campaigns for the Likud party for the televised, state-sanctioned political campaigns. In 1984, beloved sketch group Hagashash Achiver appeared in the campaign for the Labour Party, a move that was considered remarkable at the time. In the 90s, comedian Rami Heuberger of the satirical show The Chamber Quintet did the same. In this year's election campaign, a group of actors and celebrities contributed to an ad supporting the left-wing Meretz party, and popular actor Moshe Ivgi appeared in an ad for the Zionist Union. But these still remain an exception to the rule.
In order to get their message out, politicians rely on advertising. Running a smart campaign can mean the difference between winning and losing, and with the rise of social media, the options for advertising are expanding even more. With me in the studio right now is Yuval Orli, media consultant at Sassi Aharoni PR firm. Thanks for speaking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about this. I mean, is selling a candidate to the public the same as selling a product?
No, it's totally different. In politics, everything is on the table. And in consumer products, you have a product, and you want to brainwash the people looking at it until they get the message. In politics, you have everything on the table, from his private life to his politics, and all around it, and it makes it a very dynamic campaign.
Even though politicians are trying to stick to their message that they have on the paper and repeat that as much as possible.
If a politician doesn't do that, he's failing his campaign. I mean, the whole idea of a good campaign is to identify your assets and your component's disadvantage, and then stick to it. And
nail that in.
Nail it on, and to have a continuance of a campaign throughout all the months.
Right. Now, beyond making videos and pictures and everything that they can do, there's stuff that's being done behind the scenes to have that agenda at the forefront.
Right. There's the forefront and there's the background work.
Okay.
Background work is essentially the idea of your campaign. If your idea of the campaign is social problems, you will want your social problems to be in the news all the time, throughout the campaign.
What can be done?
Now, you can have, for instance, let's take Bibi Netanyahu's Congress lecture.
Right,
okay?
lecture.
So his opponents didn't want the public to look at this debate up until today, the election day. So they brought in 2 days before his going to Washington, the tents back to Rothschild.
Right.
Okay,
to have the economic agenda.
Yeah, so this is only one act of someone on the left wing that is saying, okay, he'll come back and we'll go back to our issue. And you can see in the newspapers and the TV and in the networks, the social problem is being talked about like I've never seen before.
Right, never
and
before.
That's maybe the biggest thing in this election.
Right. Now, I gotta ask you, do you need to agree with the person that you're working for?
It's a tricky question. I think that in today's atmosphere, first of all, there's more opponents to work with than ever. And I think it's a professional thing. I mean, you don't look for your own ideas as, if I had a product, I don't need to believe in the product, okay? In politics, it's a kind of a product, because it's much more
But as you said, everything
complex.
is on the table. There is some switch that you need to do, I'm sure, to represent someone who thinks differently.
Exactly, but it's not an emotional thing. It's a methodological work. It's a very professional work, and you have to look for all the points that you can bring to the table to win, and it doesn't at all touch your own opinions.
Right.
It can
Let's
help.
look at the what happened this year that's different than previous years. I think that more than ever, online has been the place where this campaign was happening.
Right. I think that if we'll look at the campaigns last time, like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, not that long ago.
And for instance, Obama's campaign in his first years, there was a lot of talk about raising money through the networks. Okay, this time it's not an issue. This time the young voters and the people our age who are online all the time, throughout the day, from the morning until the dawn, they're online. And the message is beginning in the morning or late at night, and it spreads throughout the web.
Right.
And the idea is to draw in as most new voters and young voters as you can, and the tactics are humor.
Yeah.
As we've been talking about before, a lot of humor is being used in these ads.
Certainly.
And the reason for that is the continuance of the agenda, because humor travels miles.
Yeah.
And seriousness
All right,
doesn't.
with that in mind, if you can quickly, because we're almost out of time, which campaign was your favorite this year?
I'm not going to talk about my favorite, but the most memorable.
Okay.
And that doesn't necessarily mean it's the most efficient.
Okay.
Bennett has a very efficient, very memorable, with his beard.
Right. Bennett the hipster.
Bennett the hipster, the hip right wing.
Yeah.
Daly had a very efficient and memorable one with his Sephardic, lecture, not lecture, but his all transparent
Last
people.
one?
And Kachlon.
Kachlon. All right. Thanks so much, Yuval.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it from us for our elections special. I hope whatever the results today will be, you'll still join us tomorrow for another edition of Culture.